is Dr. Anindita Ghosh. She's from Manchester, and she's basically going to speak about Bengali language, how it was developed in the 19th century. So I'm going to pass this on to her and come back to chair when she finishes her presentation. Thank you.
Right. Firstly, I must explain the slides. There are these weird notes at the end. I'm not going to sing this through, but I think this has happened because they look like musical notes, don't they? But that's because of the version of, I'm told, the PowerPoint here, which can't quite read all of my characters. So this is going to be stage prose, I'm afraid, no singing involved. Right, it's lovely to be here, and it's wonderful to be able to talk about the Bengali language, which I think is so central to all of our hearts. It is a part of my wider project, which has been about the social history of the Bengali language in colonial Bengal, which of course covers both modern-day Bangladesh and modern-day West Bengal. And I looked at different strategies of the shaping of literary tastes, standardization of language, and the burgeoning print industry of the time, so a whole range of print publications. But my particular interest was in Bottala, which is a very a special term and a very specialized concept for those of you who are not familiar with this. This is basically kind of chapbook literature being produced in the northern part of colonial Calcutta, full of a range of works from erotic stuff to even school textbooks. So it has been very understudied and underrepresented in historical studies. And I wanted to look at that in particular to see, and this was a prodigious printing and publishing industry in the second half of the 19th century that was going on in Calcutta, and Bottala was at the heart of this. And I wanted to see what, this big, it's a sea of books really that was being produced there, as to what this was doing as a counterpoint to Bhadralok refined literature of the period. And what I found actually totally amazed me, and when I started this project I didn't know what I would find. I was literally just groping in the darkness. But it is amazing to see how there was a whole body of literature that acted as a counterpoint to what was being produced by the educated westernized, with the self-image of the refined Bhadralok. And how this did so well, and this was basically a print industry which had its consumers within the low middle classes of society, who were very different from my educated groups. And as part of the project, and this is where this paper comes from, as part of the process, of course, I also looked at what was happening with the Bengali language. So you find very different literary strands. So the Bhadralok are consuming one kind of Bengali, but the Bottala literature is about a totally different kind of Bengali, which has to do with the colloquial, the folk, and so on. And I found that the three strands that the refined literature targeted were the colloquial, to begin with. There was also something known as Meli Bhasha, or women's language, and these were literally terms coming out of colonial records. I'm not making that up. And the third strand with which I was also interested was Musalmani Bangla. And that is what concerns us today to a certain extent. How did a certain kind of Bengali come to be defined and shaped by scholars, both European and Bengali, around the period beginning 1800 and slightly before that, and how this Bengali separated its way from a very different language that it had been earlier. And I argue that this is because of a very artificial process of Sanskritization of the Bengali language that happened from around the end of the 18th century. So to get to what I want to talk about today, and to also introduce you to my book, which was published by the Oxford University Press in 2006. And what I'll be sharing with you today is part of that book. But really, I also talk about a lot of other things in the book, and I've just explained my bigger project to you. So the 19th century and 1800 is literally the date when you have the first Bengali printing press set up in Serampore. And this is also therefore a very significant date for us in terms of what was happening to the Bengali language. So the 19th century witnessed the evolution of Bengali as a modern prose language in print literature, when dominant norms were being laid down to standardize and control what had been a flexible and regionalized dialect. The rapid progress of standardization and Sanskritization of the vernacular through the programs of the Fort William College, and we will soon be seeing what that institution did, early school book societies and missionaries was carried through in the activities of the literary clubs and societies and newspapers of the period set up by the Bengali intelligentsia. These are the Bhadrlok that I have been talking about. The written Sanskritic character of the new print language combined with it an unabashedly Hindu stance. An increasing number of scholars have described how an artificial purification, within quotes of course, of the Bengali language and the attempt to get rid of naturalized Perso-Arabic words from its active vocabulary made for a separation between a seemingly purer Sanskritized Shadhu style and its lesser Islamic variant. And this is what comes to be known as Musalmani Bangla. The distinction that thus resulted marked out two separate styles. One was the standard Bengali, generally marked by a fair percentage of Tatsama or Totshama or Sanskrit loanwords, and the other was Musalmani Bengali, distinguished by its dominant Perso-Arabic content, identifiable with Hindus and Muslims respectively. So the Totshama Sanskritized language were identified with Hindus, and the Musalmani Bengali was identified with Muslims. Such communalization of the once shared vernacular adds an interesting cultural dimension to studies on the political mobilization of Muslims and Hindus in 19th century Bengal. Okay, and these are the key players that we have up here. The Fort William College is set up in 1800 to train the bureaucrats of the East India Company, and they have to be trained in the local vernacular so that it makes it easy for them to administer. The Bengali Hindu Pundits are an inevitable part of this project, and they help the European scholars understand and learn the Bengali language. So Bengali scholars and officials of European origin, both together, are part of this project. Missionaries, of course, are also very important, and missionaries, as we shall soon see, have a very important role to play in the Fort William College itself, particularly in the person of William Carey. But missionaries are also important because they're experimenting with the language at the same time for very different reasons, of course, for reasons of proselytization, because so that they can translate the Christian texts into Bengali and thereby proselytize the Bengali population. So they have their own interests in the Bengali language. Of course, educationists, and you have the school book societies, a host of which come up again in the early part of the 19th century. Okay. So what then is the difference between this standard Bengali that I've been talking about and Musalmani Bangla? In 1778, Halhed, N.B. Halhed, on Nathaniel Brassey Halhed, writes the Grammar of the Bengali Language. This is the first ever Bengali printed book, and this is also the first ever Bengali grammar. And he calls this language debased. And Halhed has a very important role to play in the standardization process with his Bengali grammar, which is an extremely influential text for the future of the language and shapes its destiny. 1855, Reverend James Long is also an extremely important person in this debate, and he's the one actually who coins this term. He's the one who coins this term, Musalmani Bengali. And he says this is chiefly the language of fictional works lacking in taste and read by Muslim boatmen. And this is actually from his, this is within quotes of course, and this is from his very influential report that he publishes on vernacular publications, which is in the mid-19th century. And in 1879, and you can see through those dates how the same idea continues and it comes to being printed indelibly upon the linguistic horizon. C.W. Bolton, who is also a very important official of the time, in his report on vernacular publications in 1879, even hesitated to call it a language. And without a grammar or a vocabulary, he says it was, I quote, but a mongrel of Bengali and Urdu. Okay? So we already, I think, we are getting an idea of the attitudes towards what was seen as a very specific version of Bengali, which really shouldn't ever have been part of standardized Bengali. A deep-seated distrust of Muslims following 1857 and a predictable resentment towards Persian as the official language had a big role to play in this. Because of course Persian was the language of the Mughals and the previous imperial regime, so that had a fair share in shaping the attitudes towards the Perso-Arabic elements of the Bengali language. But, I argue, the predominance of Hindu Pundits and a Hindu urban intelligentsia in the formative stages of shaping the new print language contributed to and perpetuated such perceptions as well. So they had a very important role to play too. In 1884, Chandranath Bose, who was the librarian to the Bengal Library, in a routine annual report did not hesitate to trace the inaccuracies in a Bengali primer to the author's Islamic identity, saying how it was evident, and I quote, that the author is a Muslim not well acquainted with the Bengali language. And that's absolutely ridiculous. But these are the kind of ideas that are being, that are circulating and that are being promoted. The innate social and political agenda implicit in such utterances could not be clearer. Bengali, or at least Hindu Bengali, the favored language of officialdom, was for Hindus and Bengalis only, and Bengali Muslims were better staying off its bounds. Okay? I now move on to look at the specific activities of individuals connected to this project. Sorry. Not yet, that will come. So this is a very interesting text. This is Kolikata Komalalaya, which is by Bhavani Charan Bandyopadhyay, as you can see, published in 1823. And it's an extremely interesting text for us, because what it does is it shows us how language, the Bengali language, was in an extremely fluid state at this point. It is about the city, it is about the colonial city of Calcutta. It's about a lot of other things going on in the city, but it is also about a language. And what he does in this work is he poses this imaginary dialogue between a city man and a rural man about language. And seemingly, the rural man is asking the city man very, very, very probing, extremely difficult questions. And the city man has to put up, with a defense of why the Bengali language in the city has shaped up differently. So he seemed to be the spokesman for the urban Bengali language that is circulating in Calcutta in the early part of the 20th century. And so you can see from the question itself, it's obviously, it's Bhavani Charan who's posing both sides of the debate. So he's completely aware of the different issues involved here. So the rural man asks this city man, why did Sambhadrlok use so many alien words in the Bengali language? In other words, why do they use so many Perso-Arabic words? And the city man says, well, there are many Perso-Arabic and English words that do not have Sadhu Bengali substitutes, so we have to end up using them because they are, they're just very important and there aren't any good Bengali substitutes. And besides, hybrid Bengali is essential to survive in Calcutta. And of course, Bhavani Charan would be saying that because, he himself is a part of the colonial bureaucracy and he's done very well because of that. So he has to end up defending this hybrid language, which is the language of commerce of the period, which is central to the city, and the city cannot survive without this language.